Oh, sometimes you just nail a cup of tea. Right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan Ellis Pierce. This is a Ukraine War update extra video, giving you extra nuggets and tidbits to get your teeth into to get a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. Before I start on really discussing the counteroffensive with regard to a Wall Street Journal article, I want to just give is it a shout out? More like it's a whinge at my former colonial victims, my Australian friends. We had you on the ropes in the fourth cricket test, Ashes test, and the rain came along and rained off 2 days, and you got away with it, and you retained the Ashes on the basis of some rain. So I hope you feel good about yourselves. I hope you feel all, proud of your cricketers and happy that you're the winners, but not really the winners because you haven't won. You're just retaining it because no one's won yet. We can't win because of rain. So I hope you're happy with yourselves. Anyway, for the rest of the world that don't give a flying monkey's backside about cricket, let's get on to talking about the Ukraine war. Ukraine's lack of weaponry and training risks stalemate in fight with Russia. This is a fairly difficult read if you're pro-Ukrainian and you really want to feel invigorated about the counteroffensive and about the chances Ukraine have. This is a kind of a corrective to over-exuberance, not that you would have that anymore, because the counteroffensive certainly is a lot more stagnant than one might have hoped. As I've talked about ad nauseum, there is a change in objective, and that is a case of sitting back, letting your artillery and distance munitions do the job, and then restarting those maneuvers on a much greater scale. So, of course, it will be somewhat stagnant, somewhat of a stalemate, because actually it's a different kind of war. It's a different phase just now to what they had originally envisaged. So let's get to this Daniel Michaels piece. He says, when Ukraine launched its big counteroffensive this spring, Western military officials knew Kyiv didn't have all the training or weapons, from shells to warplanes, that it needed to dislodge Russian forces, but they hoped Ukrainian courage and resourcefulness would carry the day. They haven't. Deep and deadly minefields, extensive fortifications, and Russian air power have combined to largely block significant advances by Ukrainian troops. Instead, the campaign risks descending into a stalemate with the potential to burn through lives and equipment without a major shift in momentum. As the likelihood of any large-scale breakthrough... Actually, I'm going to go back to that. I don't know that the Ukrainians are going to be losing huge amounts of lives in this. I think the ratios would massively favor the Ukrainians while they're sitting back and not doing. Yes, there are counteroffensives in certain counterattacks in certain key locations, and they will be grinding through attriting Ukrainian forces as well as Russian forces. So, of course, they are going to be losing troops, but I don't think it's going to be at massive levels because of the nature of the type of warfare that's taking place right now. Anyway, so to continue, as the likelihood of any large-scale breakthrough by the Ukrainians this year dims, it raises the unsettling prospect for Washington and its allies of a longer war, one that would require a huge new infusion of sophisticated armaments and more training to give Kyiv a chance at victory. The political calculus for the Biden administration is complicated, and I would agree with this. President Biden is up for re-election in the fall of 2024, and many in Washington believe concerns in the White House about the war's impact on the campaign are prompting growing caution on the amount of support to offer Kyiv. He is going to be, whether this will really manifest in a change in support, I don't know. But there are going to be political calculations that are taking place behind closed doors, where there will be existential calculations. In other words, the Democrats know that they are the administration at the moment, but if they don't win that election, they won't be the administration. So that's that kind of existential calculus that will be taking place. They will be making sure they make the decisions that absolutely most most support them getting re-elected. Now, I don't know if that will mean that they will genuinely, you know, not be as open and overt with their support in terms of military and financial aid to Ukraine. I don't know if that it will have that effect, but there will be those kind of thoughts going on, and that, to me, as someone outside of the US, um, looking on, is at least something of a worry. Whether there will continue to be good, solid bipartisan support um, for the US playing a major role in supporting Ukraine, I would hope that that continues, right? The American hesitation contrasts with shifting views in Europe, where more leaders are over recent months have come to believe that Ukraine must prevail in a conflict and Russia must lose to ensure the continent's security. And I would agree there. I think there is a, a real belief amongst a lot of nations, indeed among some nations you might not have thought there would be this much support, which is good for Ukraine. So Meloni, who's in charge of Italy and is in a coalition of quite far right parties there, that was one of the governments where people were thinking, oh, this could, because Silvio Berlusconi, one of the minor coalition partners, leader of one of the coalition parties, was a really close friend of Putin's, right? And going into coalition government, taking over in Italy, you were thinking, actually, this could all go south. Italy could start pulling out. But Meloni went against that and has been massively strong. Now, I don't know that Italy's actual support for Ukraine in terms of percentage of GDP and defense spending as a percentage of GDP and this and that. I don't know whether that remotely matches other European nations, and I don't think it does. But her rhetoric is well up there. Again, this week, she absolutely slapped down Five Star, which is an opposition party that was in government. That is, I think that yeah, they were questioning her, and she like absolutely, not for the first time as well. She was really strong in her rebuttal there. So there has been this shift within Europe where we have seen nations be more confident in their support for Ukraine because they recognize that losing Ukraine on the border to Russia is a huge security threat to the ongoing stability of the EU and of each individual European nation. So the article continues. Now, Ukraine is on the offensive against Russian positions where troops have had months to build extensive defenses, including minefields, barriers, and bunkers. Western military doctrine holds that to attack a dug-in adversary, an attacking force should be at least 3 times the enemy's size and use a well-coordinated combination of air and land forces. So yeah, you need a 3-to-1 advantage attacking any kind of regular troops, actually, not even as well dug in as the Russians might be. And the Ukrainians won't have those amount of troops ratio-wise. And they were hoping for, some pretty decent tech and some fairly good tactics to overcome the Russians in these places along the front line. And it was just the sheer volume, the sheer number of mines and minefields that has really been Russia's most successful part of this whole war. I mean, laying those minefields, digging those trenches, and then slowing the offensives down so they can pepper the maneuvering Ukrainian forces with barrages of artillery has meant that they have so far staved off any major Ukrainian gains. I mean, there are some, and they continue incrementally, but the Russians are probably feeling quite good about what they've done. Now, the question, as I keep saying, is how much longer can they sustain that defense? And I think this is, it's not like you want to pin your hopes on the idea that the opposition are suddenly going to capitulate, but I just genuinely think that's a high probability eventuality here, that the Russians don't have the morale. It's not the worst thing. They don't have the reserves. They don't have the equipment, I don't think, to continue, and the supplies to continue doing what they're doing now for another couple of months. And if the Ukrainians can keep up what they're doing with HIMARS, with Storm Shadows, and with artillery and drones, then we might have a very different situation in 2 to 6 weeks' time. So one of the people referenced in this article, Gady, said that rather than concentrating forces in assaults involving many units firing volleys of rockets and artillery, supporting simultaneous waves of advancing ground forces, Ukraine is attacking sequentially, with shelling followed by company-level infantry advances. The tactic often telegraphs to the Russians that they're attacking, he said. So they're having to adapt, but one of the challenges is the Russians broadly know where the Ukrainians are going to attack all the time. They've got to negotiate minefields, and that takes time. And so they have to put preparatory things in place. And the Russians are going to be like, you're attacking there. We know where you're attacking, so we're going to have at you. If you had a completely open front line without mines, so you took mines out of it, then the Ukrainians would be, oh, let's go along, let's find a weakness, could be here, could be there, moving along all manners of places. And the Russians would be left guessing. But the Russians have just laid mines everywhere, and they're sitting back and going, right, we know where you're going to attack because you're going to amass there, and you're going to you're going to breach a really narrow corridor through those minefields, and all that time you're going to be doing that very slowly. We're going to be hammering you, and so that really plays to the Russian advantage here. The small-scale approach, which is easier for commanders to orchestrate than pushing ground forces under covering artillery, creates its own problems, such as reduced mobility. Safely moving wounded soldiers from the front and bringing in fresh ammunition is more treacherous in company-level operations because the medical and logistics corps are less protected. Conducting synchronized large-scale attacks is difficult for any armed force, even Western ones, and more and better equipment than Ukraine has, because integrating vast numbers of land-air troops in the fast, violent ballet of a frontal assault is enormously difficult. No Western military would also try to breach established defences without controlling the skies. Quote, and this is, of course, something that I've talked about and many people have talked about extensively. America would never attempt to defeat a prepared defense without air superiority, but the Ukrainians, don't have air superiority, said John Nagel, a retired US Army lieutenant who is now an associate professor of warfighting studies at the US Army War College. Quote, it's impossible to overstate how important air superiority is for fighting a ground fight at a reasonable cost in casualties. And this is the issue, you either lose loads of casualties and equipment to make some somewhat substantial gains, or you protect your equipment and troops and don't make those gains. But then, how do you succeed? Well, it becomes about doing things from a distance, but doing those things with Storm Shadows and HIMARS, but without close air support, without using... Yes, Storm Shadows are fired from jets, but they are somewhat behind lines in the safety of their own airspace. I mean, it would be great if you could bring helicopters, as well as fixed wing, have rotary capacity there, so you can fire at trench lines and actually hammer trench lines and so on and so forth. But with no air superiority, no air advantage, even, it's just so difficult. Zelensky acknowledged in an interview with the Wall Street Journal in May that Russia has air superiority at the front and that a lack of protection for Ukrainian troops means, quote, a large number of soldiers will die in the fight. So he's fairly candid about that. Ukraine had hoped to find gaps in Russia's fortifications, flood troops through, and cause the kind of havoc that its forces achieved last year among enemy ranks. Instead, unexpectedly dense minefields slowed Kyiv's initial attacking forces, leaving them exposed to strikes from Russian aircraft and rockets. Russian drones and attack helicopters, particularly the Kamov Ka-52 Alligator gunships, have proven particularly dangerous. Ka-52s, which are among Russia's most modern aircraft, can remain far behind Russian lines and rely on targeting data from spotter drones scanning the front. Their laser-guided Vikir missiles have a range of roughly 5 miles, which is more than twice the range of any portable anti-aircraft missiles in Ukraine's armory. Again, I've talked about this a number of times. They've got, say, an 8-kilometer range. The MANPADS, so man-portable air defense systems, your Stingers have a 5-kilometer range, which means that I can't hit the helicopter and the helicopter can hit us, right? So not that they'll be going for troops with MANPADS, they'll be going for Bradleys and Leopards and other mechanized equipment. And they have been hitting those at a distance and have had quite some success. But interestingly, the last week I haven't seen, and maybe it's out there, but I haven't seen a single piece of Ka-52 attack helicopter footage showing destroyed Ukrainian armaments. I've seen a number of Lancet drone footage, but I don't know that the Ka-52 attack helicopters have been attacking like they were a few weeks back and before. So I think that the Ukrainians have succeeded in getting air defenses moved forwards to give them some protection on the ground from the air. So the Russians did lose a couple of helicopters, and I wonder if they were lost due to air defense systems that they realize are now in place. What those systems might be, I don't know. And they are now no longer supporting their troops defensively with their attack helicopters, unless someone can point me towards more footage. But I think that's an interesting nugget that is worth looking into. So if anyone wants to go and see if they can find out whether the data supports that there is a lack of Ka-52 attack helicopters on the front lines doing what they were doing, I'd appreciate that. If Ukraine receives the planes, this is so. Then the article goes on to talk about air superiority, right, which is all about getting jets, getting F-16, so on and so forth. And it goes on to say, if Ukraine receives the planes, their impact on fighting would depend on many factors, including the number supplied, the sophistication of their onboard equipment, and the weapons systems provided to arm them. Incorporating advanced jet fighters into battle plans is also extremely complicated, requiring another level of synchronization in Ukrainian operations. Quote, "There is no silver bullet in war," said Mark Milley in April when asked about F-16s for Ukraine. "The outcomes of battles and wars are the function of many, many variables." And this is true. So F-16s are going to help. Of course they are. Will they be a game changer in the way that I think HIMARS have been and Storm Shadows have been? I don't know. It depends on those variables. It depends on what they're fitted with and what roles they'll be used to fulfill. I don't know. I hope so. I mean, it's surely going to be better than the present situation. Of course it will be. It's just such a shame they aren't able to use them now. That would have been too much like prior planning. Okay, moving on. So let me know what you think. How do you feel about the counteroffensive as it is? Are you like me, kind of up and down, depending on what I read, depending on whether I give in to my kind of emotional side, or whether so my emotional side is like, I was hoping for quick success, or much greater success within the time frame we've had. But I was also warning about the defenses being much more robust than people gave them credit for being. So there was like my hopeful side and my rational side, like many of us, almost like your system 1, your system 2 thinking. So for me, I don't think it's all that bad, because I'm fairly sure that the degradation of the Russian forces at the moment is huge and will really take its toll on the Russians. I do wonder about what's going on in Luhansk. I'm kind of in several minds about whether that's something to really worry about, or whether actually it's not as big an issue as one might think it is. So I don't know about that. So I kind of swing around all over the place in how I feel about the counteroffensive. But my most rational head is it's just going through, just restarting at phase 0 and going through the attrition by distance that you'd normally do by air. And that might take another month. It might take another 2 months. And that's just the way it is. And while it's taking 2 months, continue in certain places, trying to find a few weaknesses and exploiting them if possible. So a bit of maneuver warfare, a bit of deep battle doctrine, which is probe, find a weakness, exploit. I don't know if, say, for example, Kamienska, there's an element of suddenly making some ground there over the last 24, 48 hours, where that is an element of that. So it's continuing to do that, but not piling everything in, because actually you pile everything in a number of small areas and the Russians will just hammer that. Of course, you will do that. You just got to wait to the point where Russians can't hammer that because they don't have the artillery to do so. And speaking about ATACMS, and I mentioned that this morning, some people disagreed. I'm erring on the side. I'm not sold on it, but I just think it best, like, you've got two hypotheses competing here, right? This is, I always talk about this, abductive reasoning. What does the data better support? So as far as I can see, you've got two hypotheses of why the US don't supply or aren't supplying ATACMS to Ukraine, and haven't done for a long time. One hypothesis is they're just being bloody minded or afraid of Russian red lines. In other words, they're making a stupid decision, right? That's what a lot of people, Trentelenko, are like, it's my opportunity to have a go because I hate Jake Sullivan, so I'm going to have a go at him and say it's all your fault for not supplying ATACMS. And I'm thinking, is that Jake Sullivan's decision? Would he really be the one saying no, like overruling Mark Milley and Lloyd Austin and say, no, we're not providing ATACMS, while at the same time saying, yeah, we are supplying F-16s and we are supplying Bradleys and Strikers and Abrams and we're doing all this other stuff, but no to ATACMS? Is it just because we don't want a missile going into Russia and it's the political fallout of a missile being used into Russia? But if they promise, they've already got other munitions that can go into Russia, howitzers, HIMARS, they can go 84 kilometers into Russia. So you've already given them, all you're doing is extending the range a little bit. So that's your one hypothesis. And many people, many of you would adhere to that, which is like, stupid decision. What are the US doing? What are they afraid of? Blah, blah, blah. Or there's a practical military decision, which is we don't have many of these in our inventory and we need them as part of our strategic defense, blah, 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 military strategy. We need ATACMS. We haven't yet replaced them with the prisms, with these precision guided munitions that are going to eventually replace them at the end of this year. And there be all the 500 that are being made by Lockheed Martin per year are being sold, they're being made to order, right? Now, this presents a bunch of options. Well, you can surely make ATACMS to order. Like the UK come along and say, we're going to buy 500 ATACMS and give them to Ukraine. Or, et cetera, et cetera. So the hypothesis here then, competing with the Americans making a stupid decision, and the Americans are making a practical decision that they don't have enough of them, and actually they're not arguably the right munition to be giving Ukraine anyway. And I'm going to refer you now to John Oliver here, not that John Oliver, this John Oliver. I have first-hand experience using ATACMS in combat in Iraq in 2003. Placing such a priority on ATACMS is misleading. They are big, they are slow as far as missiles go. They are easy targets for missile defenses to shoot down. The cluster munition versions, way bigger than these 155mm DPICM munitions, would be a huge boost along the front lines, but the large warhead version for hitting targets would be nearly worthless in Ukraine. The US needs to work with the UK and France to get more Scalp or Storm Shadows, ramp up production of those to provide more, and the best. And also, as this is my aside here, it's about getting the number of airframes that can fire them. Originally, there was supposedly only 2 of the MiGs that could fire these. Or no, Su-24s was it? That could fire these. So you need more. I don't know how many can now, but you want to be firing lots of Storm Shadows every evening. So yeah, he continues. The best weapon for the ships firing missiles into Ukraine would be LRASMS. I don't know if that's LRASMS or anything, but even those are new to the US stockpile, and I really doubt there is any way the US would provide those. The Ukrainians could absolutely obliterate the front lines if the US would give the M39A1 ATACMS. The US is repurposing those anyways, why not give the around 650 of those that won't ever get used to Ukraine? So he's saying, don't bother giving the long-range ATACMS that are going to hit places in Crimea and whatever. Give the shorter-range ones with cluster munitions on that could obliterate the trenches. And this sounds a much better idea to me. He says ATACMS worked very well in Iraq, but only after the US Air Force and overwhelming Tomahawk missile strikes had spent weeks taking out all of Iraq's air and missile defenses. The Ukrainians sadly don't have that benefit, at least not yet. So I err on the side of this is a practical decision where ATACMS would be really lauded. And we're going to give you ATACMS, give them a bunch of ATACMS, and they actually get shot down relatively easily by air defense systems that in places like Crimea are fairly good in some of those areas, although they're struggling. Interestingly, there's some analysis on that they seem to struggle more on smaller footprint kind of aerial targets like these smaller drones, struggling with that, but larger missiles they might have better success with. Like they've shot down a few of the possibly Hrim 2s or some of the other missiles that have been shot towards Kurtz previously. But yeah, so I think that the ATACMS, the longer range ATACMS missiles, if they were given and then they're lauded, yeah, these are going to be amazing, we're going to win, and if a bunch of them got shot down straight away, then it would be a real PR disaster. It would be really embarrassing. So I just think I do err on the side that they are just not the best weapons to give, and so therefore they are going down other avenues, or at least I hope they're going down other avenues, because yeah, you get my point. Okay, talking about bots, I mentioned bots and trolls, and go and check my video. In fact, let's go and find that. So this is one. Go and check. It's from the 30th of May, and it's Russian disinformation, bots and trolls, a primer, where I talk about bots and trolls and the difference between the two, and what they do and how you can identify them, so on and so forth. And I mentioned bots this morning, what they could do. They could like tweets, or they're not called tweets. By the way, this isn't Twitter anymore. It's X. It's been rebranded today, so it's not Twitter. They'll change, I'm sure, the URL, but it's now X, and these aren't tweets. They're whatever. So yeah, they don't just like tweets and like videos or whatever. They do that, but they do other things as well. And here, Johnny H. Johns says bots do more than that. They download videos to simulate watching it using the Google API for YouTube, which was part of the reason Google began clamping down on it. In Google's developer API version 3 for YouTube, there's an API for videos rates. There's also an API entry for subscriptions and inserts. They subscribe to channels. I believe it's half of your subscriptions. Ha ha ha. They do the same in other platforms. So in other words, they don't just like something. So what you do is you have these hundreds of thousands of SIM cards, or effectively fake profiles set up as like different mobile phones or whatever, or SIM cards, and you get those profiles to, I'm probably butchering this, to do all this activity. And by doing all that activity, by watching videos over and over and subscribing to channels, so you go and look at some of the pro-Russian channels and you're like, how have you got that many subscribers? How do that many people like your overt propaganda nonsense? And it's because actually, arguably, half of those could be bots. There aren't that many people who are subscribed. Half of the subscribers are fake, profiles. They just aren't real people. And half of the likes for those videos aren't likes from real people. But what that does is it amplifies the message, because the algorithms kick in, whereby YouTube, and the same for Twitter, like the more people that like your video, like the kind people on my videos say that please like, subscribe and share, and like I say that because actually that helps grow the voice of this channel, because the more people that like it, the more people that watch the videos, it gets on the algorithm. It's like a snowball effect, and it gets out to more people, and it turns up on more people's feeds, right? But if you can manipulate that artificially by having hundreds of thousands, I mean, that was just one bot factory that was 150,000 profiles, right? You've got a number of these bot factories around the world doing this all the time, generating likes and subscriptions and views for videos and tweets, then it amplifies those so they turn up on everyone's threads and people go, oh, I'm going to watch that. And then you get fed that disinformation. And it's all part of that it's not quite freedom of speech. It's like some people are freer than others, I guess. So bots are a big challenge. Right, Chriso wiki thread here. Another show trial of a mobilized Russian soldier for desertion has been held in the Tula region. The man was tried before an audience of 200 fellow soldiers and was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment in a penal colony. Wow. The trial of the man named as P.A. Shaparov is the latest in a series of show trials that have been held in an effort to combat rapidly increasing rates of desertion from the Russian army. According to the garrison's court press service, he failed to turn up for service on the 22nd of November 2022 after being mobilized. He remained at home until the 13th of February 2023 when he voluntarily surrendered to military officials. He pleaded guilty at his trial. Punishments for desertion may soon become drastically more severe. The Russian Duma is currently debating a bill to amend the law on citizenship to enable the state to deprive people of their citizenship for actions that pose a threat to national security. According to the authors of the bill, such actions include desertion, discrediting the armed forces of the Russian Federation, and calls for extremism. And that kind of leads us onto this. This is a pretty incredible bit of recorded footage. So this is a Russian soldier recording this, and it's his commanders making Russian officers yelling at, as it says here, Refuseniks from the 34th Brigade, a Storm Brigade, who refused to return to the Bakhmut zero line. I'll tie you up, says one officer, take you to the zero line and shoot you. So I will read the subtitles, but just to let you know what it sounds like to begin with. So you got gunshots in there and everything. So I'm going to rewind that and just read to you what's going on. I'll try and make sense of it with the different people talking. So the officer says, "You're a provocateur," and the Refusenik says, "I'm not a provocateur." And the officer replies, "Shut your mouth, or I'll tie you like an effing ram. I'll take you to the zero line, take you out, and no one will find you again." You making claims like that now, says the officer. I don't know in response to what. And then they're shouting, "Get up," or similar, followed by a gunshot that you heard just then. And then something unintelligible, but essentially the commander is ordering and insulting the fighters. And then there's obviously some kerfuffle going on. The officer says, "We live in the same country." Refusenik says, "I know." The officer says, "Well, why the F are you doing this? Are you a provocateur?" "No, I'm not a provocateur. I'm just a..." "What's going on, Comrade Major?" says another Refusenik. The major says, "Lads, the brigade commander gave us a task." The major continues, 10 people to the commandant company, 10 people to another unit. It's not a zero line. Why are you afraid? And the Refusenik says, "We're not intimidated." And the major says, "I helped you out twice. You weren't taken. Now I can't help you." And so on and so forth. And you can listen to it and all the sound effects that go in with that, all the kind of reality of shots and whatnot. The threat of being taken, tied up and taken to the zero line means that, it tells you two things. One, that people don't want to fight. They just don't want to fight because there's obviously a really high, or at least a perception of a really high chance of dying. So that must reflect something. Things are not good on the Russian front line and they must be losing a lot of troops. but it also tells you a lot about the style of leadership in the Russian command, and that's something that has long been there, that kind of style. So that was from War Translated. Now I'm going to show you some footage here, and again, you will have seen similar footage before. I've shown you similar style of footage before. This is Bakhmut, and this is Russian liberation. This is what Russian liberation looks like. We are going to liberate your nation. We're going to liberate Bakhmut. We are coming to give you freedom. Do you know how you were existing when Bakhmut was a fully functioning city? Well, the question is, for the Russians, are you going to improve that situation? Are you going to improve that situation? Yes, we are. We are going to liberate the Ukrainians. It will be much better. Their lives will be better. And this is how we will liberate them. And just look at this. This is Bakhmut now. Staggering. There's barely a millimeter of that city that is untouched. It's just an absolute travesty. And, given half the chance, I assume Russia would do that to Odessa as well. Yeah, it might be lucky in a way that Bakhmut isn't a cultural, an iconic cultural centerpiece like somewhere like, imagine if Odessa was situated there. And you'd see that destruction. It's sad enough that it's happening to a kind of fairly industrialized town like this, and it's bad enough. But if it were to be something that held, cultural and historic and spiritual significance for so many people, that would have been even worse. But I mean, it's just terrible. It's absolutely terrible. That is, Russian liberation. And speaking of liberation, the idea that the Ukrainians are outlawing Russian and we can't speak Russian and all this nonsense, which is outright disinformation. Well, let's go and have a look at how the Russians have done things since the beginning of the war. This is a really interesting thread by Ariana GOC here. So one of the first things Russia did after invading Crimea and Donbass in 2014 was to hold public book burnings of all Ukrainian language texts from libraries, government offices, and schools. Ukrainian was eliminated from government use, banned, and was stopped being taught in schools. Now, this is a classic example of Russian projection, where you project onto others your own behaviors. They, almost all the time that Russia accuse Ukraine of doing something, it's because they've done it themselves. It's kind of like, you're accusing us of war crimes? I know you are. You said you are, but what am I? Like, grow up. But this is what we see from Russia. It's like, you are banning the Russian language. You're burning books. No, we're not. But you've done that. And here's the evidence. So in February 2022, Russian invasion forces eliminated all Ukrainian books from Mariupol's Priazovsky University. Ukrainians in Russia-occupied Ukraine are routinely detained and tortured for merely speaking Ukrainian. I mean, there you go. Then we have Russian occupiers ultimately destroyed all Ukrainian language and literature textbooks in Russia-occupied Mariupol, taking them straight from schools to landfills. Again, evidence. Last March, Russian forces were searching homes in Luhansk, Donetsk, Chernihiv, and Sumy oblasts for extremist books about Ukrainian nation builders and patriots, and the Ukrainian army's struggle for independence, Maidan Revolution, and Russia's war on Ukraine. They do this everywhere they occupy in Ukraine. In November 2022, Ukraine's Deputy Minister of Education and Science reported that in the Kherson Oblast, Russian forces burned Ukrainian books and completely destroyed 16 schools and damaged 48 so badly that classes could not be resumed. Back in January 2023, 3,536 educational institutions from kindergartens to universities in Ukraine had been damaged or destroyed by Russia. The number has risen since then. And then there is access to education. In January 2023, UNICEF reported that as a result of Russia's war against Ukraine, 5.3 million Ukrainian children face barriers preventing access to education, including 3.6 million children directly affected by school closures. In May 2022, the Defense Forces of Zaporizhia region reported that the Russian forces in Melitopol were destroying books on the history of Ukraine. The history texts became banned literature because they promote the ideas of nationalism. This is, of course, fascism. This is basically fascism 101. Burning books. Oh, I wonder who did that before. Oh, who was it? Oh, you guys are going to... Oh, no, that was it. It was Hitler in Nazi Germany. So Russia spent the spring and summer of 2022 bombing the publishing and printing houses in Kharkiv. And there's evidence of that. The total... in Kharkiv, the publishing center of Ukraine, the total number of books printed in Ukraine fell from 25.7 million in 2021 to 9.2 million in 2022 as a result. And, war has taken its toll on Ukrainian publishing. This is an article that looks into some of the details there. To continue, the number of titles published in Ukraine was cut almost in half last year, dropping from 17,000 in 2021 to just under 9,000, according to Ukrainian Book Institute, which collects data on the industry. In addition to book burnings, language bans, bombing schools, destroying Ukrainian publishing houses, Russia has also severely damaged or destroyed many museums, galleries, and other cultural establishments across Ukraine. I mean, goodness, look at what they did in Kherson when they were there. And then stealing animals from the zoo, and then just the whole range of cultural places, from zoos to museums to libraries, just terrible. This is Russian, scare quotes, culture. Evil, barbarism, savagery, genocide, ethnocide, linguicide, cultural side, and then Moscow's propaganda factory churns out its horse shite about, quote, cancelling Russian culture in response to consequences for ardent supporters of genocide of Ukrainians. It's just ridiculous. So, hey, MFA Russia. So what this is in response to, right back at the beginning of the thread, is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for Russia saying here, in their Russophobic paranoia, Justin Trudeau and Freeland, this is basically having going at Canadians, and their liberal globalist entourage are attempting to cancel Russian culture by sanctioning Russian artists and pop stars en masse. What is the next step in mimicking the Nazis? Burning books or duct taping performers? Yeah, because that's what you have pretty much done. So this whole thread is in response to that Russian approach, and those Russian claims, sorry. And at the end here, hey, MFA Russia, go screw yourselves. Keep promoting your propaganda. You're helping build the case against yourselves for The Hague. Well said. And I think that's enough from me today. There was one other thing I was going to dip into, but it's been a bit of a long one. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Please take care. Like, subscribe, and share, because, I want real people to like this, to throw this out there. If they really appreciate that, then that's fantastic. And it does spread the news or the videos further afield, and that is hopefully beneficial to the world, rather than that happening to Russian propaganda that's full of lies and nonsense and supports genocide. So I'd rather that didn't happen. So down with the bots. Anyway, take care. Toodle pips. Speak soon.